We are in this really cool series. I love this series. Colorful stories, 9 colorful teachings. Now, as you're looking, you're probably looking at this picture, and you may see that it is the story of Samson. What did I end up calling this? What does it say on the sheet? What did I title it? The tragic story of Samson. Yeah, it started out as Samson's muscle and mane. That was my first attempt, was Samson's muscle and mane, because Samson is known for his muscle and his glorious mane. I'm not known for my mane right now. In the rest of the year I am, but not right now. But he had muscle and mane. But I wanted to tie this in more, that this is a tragic story, the tragic story of Samson. The coloring sheet, I tried my best to sort of help us to see that, because this story is kind of a weird story, especially as it's been taught in Sunday school, how I remember it. When I looked up coloring pictures for Samson, some of them were so fascinating, because some of them show this guy, and he's sort of like smiling as he's pushing apart these pillars that are holding up this temple, and he's kind of like, and I'm like, I don't think that's what we're supposed to take from the story. Some of it sort of like glorifies this character Samson as sort of like the Superman of the Bible. And it really misses the point of the actual story, which is that this is a tragedy. This story is a tragic story. He is not a hero. Some people say, where Samson, it just kind of takes it in a different place of where I want us to be. So I want us to live with that word tragedy, tragic, sort of recognizing the kind of story that we're reading. So if you haven't heard this story before, you'll find this in the book of Judges. And like I've been doing throughout this entire series, we're not going to read the passages that's found in Judges. If you want to go to the book of Judges and do that, you're more than welcome to do that. You'll find the scripture is Judges 13 through 16. That's where the whole story is found. What I have done is I've tried to take this and put it in sort of like fairy tale form, story form, because that's really how the stories were told when they were written. We've talked about this, that they were shared around fires. They were shared in villages. They were shared among families. They were oral traditions that were passed down from generation to generation well before they were ever written down. So there's a good possibility they might have even started out with maybe a grandpa talking to his kids like I talked about last week, or maybe a local village historian, or actually probably even better, storyteller. Maybe it happened while the kids are all gathering together, and the local storyteller would look at him and say, "Once upon a time." And once we hear that phrase, we all get in story mode, don't we? Doesn't that sort of like set you in a certain mood, in a sort of mode that you're, and that's what we should do. Get comfortable, sit back, kind of get in your once upon a time mode. It opens us up to some things like curiosity. When we talk about once upon a time, it opens us up to maybe letting go of some of the tension we hold with the scriptures. Maybe it frees us up from some of the traditions that we've been taught, so we can learn a little bit different way than maybe we heard the story all throughout our lives. So let's listen to it, and let's hear it in maybe our storybook version. Once upon a time, before a baby named Samson was even born, an angel came to visit his mom and dad. The angel had a very special message. God is going to give you a baby boy who will be extra strong, but you must never, ever cut his hair. And he must make special promises to God. When baby Samson was born, his parents were so happy. They remembered what the angel said, so they never cut Samson's hair. It grew long and curly, and as Samson grew up, he became the strongest person anyone had ever seen. He could lift heavy rocks. He could bend metal. He even defeated lions with his bare hands. But God had made Samson strong for a very important reason: to help protect God's people from their enemies. Samson was supposed to use his strength to help others and obey God. But as Samson got older, he started making some not so good choices. Instead of listening to his parents and obeying God, Samson thought, "I'm so strong. I can do whatever I want." So he began being mean to people. He began to show off his strength to make himself appear important. Eventually, Samson met a woman named Delilah. She wasn't a very good friend to him. She kept asking Samson, "What makes you so strong?" She asked and 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 she asked, even though Samson knew he shouldn't tell her. Finally, Samson got tired of her asking. He thought, "I'm so strong, nothing bad could happen to me." So he told Delilah his secret. "My hair has never been cut. That's where my strength comes from." That night, while Samson was sleeping, Delilah cut off all of his long hair. When Samson woke up, something terrible had happened. His strength was gone. He had broken his promise to God, and now he couldn't protect anyone anymore. Samson's enemies captured him. They put him in jail. And Samson felt very sad and sorry. He realized he had made many bad choices. He had been thinking only about himself. Well, while Samson was in jail thinking about his choices, his hair slowly started to grow back. One day, his enemies brought him to a big building with tall stone pillars. They wanted to make fun of him because he wasn't strong anymore. Samson felt his hair had grown back a little, and some of his strength was returning. So he pushed the big stone pillars with all of his might, and the whole building came tumbling down. Now, the question we should ask ourselves, any time that we read a story, any story, it doesn't have to be a Bible story, it can be any story, we should ask ourselves, what are we supposed to learn from a story like this? What are we supposed to take away from a story about this guy? Now, there's probably all kinds of things that we could learn from this. Bible stories are sort of like cubes. They're kind of like maybe a little bit like a Rubik's Cube. The more you turn it, the more you twist it, the more you change it, the more you shift it around, the more you can actually find to it, the more dimension that it actually has. The more it's even like our coloring sheets. Everybody's going to color their story differently. Everybody's going to color their sheet differently. And everybody's going to have a different perspective the way that they view the story. But when we ask ourselves that, what am I supposed to learn from a story like this? Again, there's a couple things we can do. Kurt might learn something different, and he might come and he may say, "Hey, you know what I got from that story today was this." And I'll look at Kurt and I'll say, "Kurt, you know what I learned from this story was this." And somebody else may come and say, "Well, you know, my takeaway was this." And man, we're all blessed by everybody's different perspectives. But it always helps to say, but what did the original author intend? What was the author of this book? Or this story? Why was he telling this story? Or maybe even a better question than that is, why was this story a popular story that got passed down from generation to generation? I mean, all of us have stories in our families, don't we? And you tell stories that are a part of your stories' families, and they get passed down. Some of them are ugly stories. Some of them are really funny stories. Some of them might be tragedies about people in your past, in your family's past. My family has a mythological story about our name. So when Jill and I were talking to somebody a couple days ago, he was on the phone with another guy, and he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, the guy wants to know if you're related to Steve Carell." And I just rolled my eyes, and I was like, "Nope. He's only got one L. I've got two." And he's like, he rolled his eyes at you. And I was like, "Thank you for that. That's great. I'm looking forward to working with that guy soon." But the story that we tell ourselves, and why, maybe we're related to Steve Carell, I don't know. But what I do know is that most people look at our name and they say, "Why do you have an E and not an O?" Well, the story was that there were three brothers, and they were all Scottish, Irish. They all had big tempers, and if you know me, I can somehow connect and relate to them. Apparently, the brothers got really mad at each other. Do you know this? Dad told us this. Oh, I've heard this story a million times. My mom's like, "I don't know the story." That's because she only pays attention to the Slovak side of our family. She never paid attention to the other side. She's a little discriminatory like that. It's fine. I love the Slovak side of our family probably more too, but that's okay. Anyways, apparently, I always heard there was like the McCarrolls. And then apparently somebody got ticked off and dropped the Mick and was like, "I'm going to be the Carrolls and you can be the McCarrolls." And then the other two brothers got mad at each other, and he was like, I'm going to drop the O and I'm going to have an E and make it even more confusing. People will be the Carrells or the Carroll. I don't know what will be. But apparently that's the story, and that's the story I was told, and that's the story I'm going to pass on to my children, that you had these feuding brothers back in your past somewhere, right? We all have stories like that, right? But why would we tell that story? Well, Jeff, I know why I tell that story. It explains my temper. And I need a way to explain my temper because it justifies behavior, right? See, we all do this in some way. Maybe you had an uncle that was like he was really bad with money. He lost all the money doing the stock market, and he was destitute. And somebody's like, why would you tell that story? Well, because it explains why I'm so bad with money, right? Like people will do that to explain how they got where they are, who they are, and what they are. Now, I think Samson is that kind of story. It is told to people to try to explain, hey, this is a tragic story of a guy. Nobody wants to be like this guy. And then they're like, but this isn't our blood. This is kind of who we are. We all have a tendency to be like this guy. So grandpa's telling the story to the kids, and the kids are like, oh, what an awful story. He's like, yeah, well, don't go be like Samson. Oh, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Do you see what I'm doing here? And so they would take it away. The kids would hear it, and they would take something from it. Now, we know that this is the idea behind the story, because if we go back to the book that it landed in, the book ends with a verse that sort of says, everything you just read can be explained like this. Judges 21:25. It ends like this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. And here's kind of what I think ends up happening. That's like something you can remember pretty easy, right? There was no king in Israel. Everybody just did what they wanted. And I can see and I can imagine parents looking at their kids and going, you know that story of Samson? Remember how I told you not to be like Samson? Well, there was no king in Israel, and everybody just did what they wanted. And the kid would go, I don't understand. What are you trying to say? That I'm the king of this house, and you can't just do whatever you want. Go clean your room. That's supposed to be funny. Right? Like that's what we would do. We would take the story and we would like make it connect on like a very like connecting way, right? Like we would make it make sense in our context. Well, that's sort of the point for all of these people. Adults and young people and children and teenagers, whatever. The bottom line was, in those days, there was no king. So stories like this happened because people were just doing whatever they wanted. That Samson didn't have any sort of authority over him. He didn't have God as a king. He didn't have another king. He just sort of did whatever he wanted, whatever he thought was right in his eyes. And so things ended up really bad. See, the book of Judges ends this way, sort of in a strange way, because, that's not how you end a book, is it? Again, it doesn't end with they lived happily ever after. It doesn't end with everything was cool and God was happy with them. It ends with people just did whatever they felt. It's really kind of a depressing verse. But there's a reason for that. Because that's what the book of Judges is. It's sort of a depressing book about people messing up. That they did whatever they wanted to because they had no king. Judges is filled with stories like Samson's. Tragedies. And to be clear, tragedies about people we're not supposed to emulate, but whose tragic stories we're meant to learn from. Does that make sense? See, I feel like, and I'm not bashing how I grew up, but I think this is important for all of us. This is why I wanted to do these 9 colorful teachings, because I want us to take these stories that we were taught a certain way, pull them out of maybe the way we learned them, so that we can twist the cube a different way and maybe learn something different from it. Because I want to teach my kids, hey, don't be like Samson. He made tons of really bad mistakes. he really screwed up in a whole lot of ways. And there's a reason that he did that. Again, it's a story. We're not meant to emulate him, but we can learn from him. Now, before we go any further, we've now set up this idea of tragedy. We've set up that this is a tragic story. We've removed it from maybe a context that we had previously, and we've placed it in the correct kind of context as a tragic story. But I want us to recognize, and I think we probably all know this, that tragedies like this aren't unique to the Bible. In fact, we probably know the idea of tragedies better because of a man named Shakespeare. One of Shakespeare's most well-known tragedies is the story of Romeo and Juliet, right? Okay, listen. In that story, I'm just going to give us a synopsis here. Two young lovers from feuding families in Verona, Italy, Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet, meet at a party, and they instantly fall in love, secretly marrying the next day with the help of Friar Lawrence. Now, first of all, there's a lesson here. Don't get married the day after you meet somebody, Emily. Right? Don't fall in love and get married. And if you did that and you're going strong, I'm proud of you. Good for you. But it doesn't seem to be a great idea right off the bat. So that's the first thing we see here, right? Now, the reason I tell you that is Emily was super excited about this. So we watched the 90s version. Anybody remember the 90s version of Romeo and Juliet? Yeah. Leonardo DiCaprio? Yeah. Jill was sitting on the end of the couch. I'm going to totally go off script because I want to. Jill's on the end of the couch and she goes, "Oh, now I remember why everybody loved this movie. Leonardo DiCaprio." And I'm on the other end of the couch and I go, "I remember why I love this movie. Claire Danes." We just pause the movie right here. Just right here. Reliving our childhood crushes that we had. But that movie was so cool, and it was so fun to watch with her, because she goes, "This is terrible." And I was like, "No, Emily, this is 90s. And if you know anything about it, like, the movie is so cool because they're actually using the Shakespearean dialogue, but there are helicopters, there are guns, there are cars. I mean, there's a great soundtrack. Anyways, it tells this whole story, and I see this picture of them, and Emily was laughing. If you know Emily very well, when she sees something like this, something where it's not really uncomfortable, because she's not uncomfortable with us, but she's sitting there watching them have googly eyes through this fish tank, and she's like, hee, 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 hee. That's what she's doing the entire time. But they're like looking at each other, right? And they're like, "We're so in love." And I was like, yeah, okay. Let's move on. Claire Danes. I mean, come on. All right. Two young lovers, Romeo and Juliet, meet at a party. They instantly fall in love. They secretly marry the next day with the help of Friar Lawrence. Now, their happiness is short-lived when Romeo kills Juliet's cousin Tybalt in a street fight, leading to Romeo's banishment from Verona. Meanwhile, Juliet's parents, unaware of her secret marriage, arrange for her to marry Count Paris. To avoid the unwanted marriage, Juliet takes a potion from Friar Lawrence that makes her appear dead and plans for Romeo to return and take her away when she awakens. However, Romeo never receives the message explaining the plan, and believing Juliet is truly dead, drinks the poison beside her tomb. Juliet awakens to find Romeo dead, and in despair kills herself with his dagger. And the tragedy of their death reconciles the feuding families who vow to end their feud in honor of the young lovers. Now, anybody who's seen that movie, anybody in history who watched that play, anybody who watched West Side Story, the thing that we learn from this story is that there's futility in this feuding, that it doesn't make any sense. Now, we saw this lived out in American history with the Hatfields and the McCoys and the battle that goes between them. We see this in gangs. We see this in war. We see this in all kinds of stuff still today, that there is a futility in feuding. That what would happen if everybody had just stopped and said, "What are we doing? Why are we killing each other? Why are we fighting? Maybe we should stop this." And there's something powerful about tragedy that teaches us this. Again, we're not supposed to emulate Romeo and Juliet. Could you imagine what would happen if we taught this to kids and said, "Now everybody go be like Romeo and Juliet"? That'd be a terrible, terrible idea. That's not the point of tragedies. But here's what's really fascinating. There's even a better comparison in history for Samson that helps us literally frame the kind of story that Samson is meant to be. That honor goes to another character, another tragedy, a guy named Hercules. Listen to this story. Hercules was the son of Zeus, blessed with superhuman power that he used to complete 12 impossible labors and defeat countless monsters. Like Samson, Hercules could not master his own emotions and impulses. His violent temper and inability to control his passions led to tragedy after tragedy. Now listen to this. In the end, his jealous wife, believing she was saving their marriage, gave him what she thought was a love potion, but was actually dead poison that she covered his robe with. The robe burned his flesh, causing unbearable agony. The mighty hero Hercules, who had conquered the most fearsome beasts and completed the most impossible tasks, found himself defeated not by any external enemy, but by his own character flaws and the tragic misunderstandings of those closest to him. Unable to bear the pain, Hercules built his own funeral pyre, and that's how the story ends. Just like Samson, an absolute, total tragedy. Now, here's where this gets so fascinating. If you start digging deeper into these stories, they get weirdly coincidental. Samson and Hercules both demonstrated extraordinary power by killing lions. But it's not just Samson and Hercules. There was another character named Heracles, which is where the Roman Hercules comes from. He was the Greek Hercules. So now we've got Samson, we've got Hercules, we've got Heracles. We have another Mesopotamian one that, I forgot his name. There's another character, identical stories. They demonstrated their strength by killing lions. Listen to this. This gets really weird. Hercules, Heracles, Samson, they all relieved their thirst with water from a miraculous stone. Hercules, Samson, Heracles destroyed parts of cities. Hercules, Heracles, Samson all had relationships with a woman who they thought they loved that led to their deaths, not in battle, but by choice. Now, when I tell you that, some people find these similarities really, really disturbing. Like, this is one of those things where when you start to say, did you know that the story of Samson looks almost identical to the story of Hercules? People go, don't mess with my Bible. When you start to say, did you know that the story of Jonah doesn't seem to be unique? There are other flood stories that are very similar all throughout the ancient Near East. People start to go, I don't want to hear that. You're messing with what I learned. Don't ruin this for me. So people find it a problem that many Bible stories like this aren't unique. And this gives me an opportunity to say something that I think is really important for us in this church. That shouldn't bother us at all. It shouldn't bother us even a little bit. In fact, when we see that, we should lean more into it because it means that we're taking academics and science and research and archaeology, that we're taking these things seriously. And when we do that, when we begin to have that understanding and that basis, it actually helps us to understand these stories and these scriptures even better. Because we know more about some of these cultures that seem to have impressed upon some of these cultures and this air that they all breathe together, and it gives us a fuller picture of why stories like this were being told. It helps us to see the differences in the stories sometimes, that help us to see how the Jewish understanding of God looked a little bit different than the people around them. It begins to help us to see an unfolding revelation about a loving, caring, compassionate God that would have been just completely unknown to the people of the ancient world. Does that make sense? It's really, really cool when you think about it. It would sort of be like this. It would sort of be like thinking that Kroger brand root beer was the only root beer available. And I'm not bashing on Kroger, I'm just generic root beer. Okay, does anybody like root beer? Do I need to find something better? Do I need to find something better? Is this okay? We'll do this. I don't want to talk about beer. I don't want to make my mom upset, so we'll go root beer, okay? It would be like thinking that was the only thing available. And then all of a sudden, you go downtown to that store on the Circle that has that whole wall of root beer, and all of a sudden your eyes are open. You're like, there's so many options available. I had no idea. Like, this is amazing. Now my understanding. And then you start to get addicted to root beer and you start to learn more about it. At least if you're me, that's what you do, right? But you've opened up your eyes that there's more happening around us. Well, that's what I want us to see here. It should not bother us when we find stories that are similar in different places. Last week, we learned it was common for cultures across the ancient Near East to share stories like this. One way I put it was that, did you know that ancient Near East people breathed the same air as their ancient Near East neighbors? And that was why they would tell the same kind of stories. In fact, here's a really interesting thing. A majority of scholars today actually suggest that Samson was the Hebrew adaptation, like Hercules was a Roman adaptation of an ancient Near Eastern heroic archetype that led to a plethora of similar stories just like this. Why? That's the question. Why? Why was a story like this so popular in that culture in that time? Well, see, all of these stories were meant to teach the people in all of these different cultures something. And the question for then is, why? Why is this story unique? What was this author trying to teach his audience? Why did this version of the story get passed down from generation to generation among the Hebrew people? Why did the Romans pass their story down? But for us who are interested in the scriptures, why was this story passed down? Why was this way taught? What was he trying to teach his audience with the story of Samson? And here's again what's really cool. It all comes back to that verse that we started with that concludes the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. See, listen to this again. In the time of Judges, as the book explains in the closing verse, it's giving us context. It's saying that people had been given the blessing of God. And this is the story of the Hebrew people. This is the story of the people of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. That they were told that they were going to be a blessing. One of the most important stories to them, sort of the foundational story, was the story of Abraham. Not the Genesis stories, not those stories. The story of Abraham is really the foundational story for them. Because it is the story where God looks at this guy and he says, I'm going to make you a new tribe, a new people. You're going to leave all of these other tribes and people that you know, all these people that you breathe the same air with, all these people that you have similar stories and similar understandings. He says, I'm going to take you and I'm going to begin telling a different kind of story with you. Your life is going to look different. Your people are going to look different. Your generations are going to look different. The nation that comes out of you is going to look different. And then he says something that's really crazy. He says, and as a result, all of those nations are going to be blessed. And everybody reads that and goes, what? That makes no sense. Because in the ancient world, to bless your neighbor was a terrible idea. Your neighbor is out to get you. This is survival of the fittest. This is the Iron Age. This is swords and weapons and shields and arrows and who's going to kill who first, right? Let's strike them before they strike us was sort of the idea behind everything they did. And all of a sudden, he drops in this idea, no, you're going to bless your neighbors. Except we get to Judges. And we see this story that all of a sudden this guy Samson shows up. He gets all of this strength, all of this energy. and he wastes it. He doesn't do anything he's supposed to do. None of the people do what they were called to do. They do whatever they thought was right in their own eyes, which included taking the lives of their neighbors, which included just doing whatever they felt like to get ahead, whatever they thought was the thing that they were supposed to do. And what they're saying is in this passage, and therefore, everything was a mess as a result. People had been given the blessing of God, chose their own path. And then we start to see where this ends up. It leads to chaos and defeat. Another way to put it that I wrote in here was that rather than serving a king who would lead them to become who they were meant to be, they served themselves as kings in the absence of one. Does that make sense? Rather than serving a king that was supposed to take them on the path where they were supposed to go, they chose to serve themselves because they didn't have a king. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can learn from this story today. See, I propose to you this. I propose to you that while the story of Samson leaves no king as the sad reality of that era, that's their takeaway. This is because we have no king. That is the thing that they learn from, that there is something else that we can also learn today when we look at the big picture, and that is that we do have a king. We do have a king today who is worthy of worship, who is worthy of honor. We have a king who is worthy of reverence. And I'm going to say it clear because I believe it, because this is who my king is. I think that king is Jesus. Can I get an amen, Kurt, on that one? Amen. Okay. That king is Jesus. See, listen. And this is literally like this is the most preachy I'm ever going to get, okay? I'm even going to move this thing to the middle like an old school preacher. Because listen, Jesus represents everything that Samson was supposed to be, but failed to become. And Jesus, truthfully, represents everything that you and I are supposed to be, and too often fail to become. See, Samson used his strength, he used his giftedness, he used his blessedness for personal gain. Now listen to this. But Jesus, so cool. But Jesus used his power to what? To serve other people. Where Samson and we use our strength and our giftedness and our blessings for personal gain, Jesus uses his power, his blessedness to serve others. Where Samson broke his vows to God, the vows he promised to keep, Jesus remained perfectly faithful. Where Samson was defeated by his enemies, Jesus conquered the enemies that we all face of sin and death. Where Samson's story ended in tragic self-destruction to take life. Do you realize that? I removed some stuff in the picture because I thought maybe it was a little disturbing for our kids. But in the picture, initially, there were actually people who were running from the things coming down, because that's the tragedy of the story. That as he breaks the pillars apart, he doesn't just kill himself, he kills everybody. It's a mutual destruction. It's the final destruction of everything. He says, if I can't have it, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. Jesus' story doesn't end like that. It ends with sacrifice, where he gives his life to save yours and to save mine. See, Jesus brought a new kind of story of a truly worthy hero, where we can look at ourselves and we can look at our kids and we can say, don't be like Samson. Don't be like me. Don't be like any king that you could serve in this world. Go and be like Jesus. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, here's what's really cool. The early church ended up reflecting on this reality. And did you know, and I don't know if you know this, the early church came up with songs so that they could sing, so they could remember things like this. Did you know that? Like the first century church would sing these songs as a way to worship, so they would remember these things. Now, the melody is long forgotten, but we still have the words. And the Apostle Paul actually shared this with us. And if we wrote this song today, and Maddie, we've been working on some songs, and the songwriters in this room, and Dan and a bunch of other people, we've been working on writing songs for Southeast. Like, I sort of imagine us writing a song like this, and this song is about the futility of seeking our own throne in the place of one who should occupy it. We would probably write that a certain way, but this is the way that the early church sang it. Listen to this. And I want you to imagine, I don't know the melody, so just sort of pretend. Do nothing from selfish ambition or empty conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. What an awesome lyric. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but the interests of others. Like, wouldn't it be awesome if this was the only song the church sang? Like, how that would change our world? Let's keep going. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Then it goes on. So listen to that. So convicting. Let the same mind be in you. This goes back to Paul later on saying, the renewal of your mind. Change, renew, allow Christ to live within you. Okay, let's keep going. So good. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness, and being found in appearance as a human, which I've always loved. It's sort of like Jesus being surprised. Like, we don't have much about his teenage years. We don't know a lot about Jesus' teenage years, but at some point he realized, and a lot of us think this, wait a minute, I'm God. He actually was. Imagine having to wrestle with that. Like, I look at my kid and I go, just so you know, you're not God. And then he looks at Joseph and he goes, actually, I am. Now, what could he have done with that, right? That's what the song is trying to get us to see. Surprisingly find himself in human form. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Get maybe to the chorus, I'm not sure. Therefore, God exalted him even more highly and gave him the name that is above every other name, so that at the name given to Jesus, every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now, it's a really dangerous passage because in some ways we look and we say, you know what? This turns into everybody should worship Jesus. If you think that, novel idea, start with yourself. This song, if we go back to the beginning, is not about looking at other people and telling them, you better worship Jesus. The song is about you saying, I better worship Jesus. When I look at Jesus, my knee should bow. When I look at Jesus, if I believe this story and it's a center point for me, then my tongue better confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And listen, to the glory of God the Father. That we are made for more. That by being Jesus people, by bending our knee to Jesus, by following Jesus, by confessing that he is Lord, by living it out with our lives, by actually believing by doing what we say we believe, that we glorify God and we do what we were meant to do. Bottom line is this then, that I want us to take away. We will all choose a king. Every one of us. We will all choose a king. We have a ton. Do you know we have a ton of kids? Every one of those kids is looking at us and saying, what king are they choosing? Every one of them is looking at us as adults, and they're asking themselves, what king are they choosing? Because they can smell it. They know when we're full of garbage. They know what hypocrisy looks like. And they know to call it out when they say, you say it, but you don't really mean it. Every one of us will choose a king. And that goes back to that story of Samson. He had an opportunity to choose a king, and he didn't. And every one of us has an opportunity to choose a king. And here's the thing, we will choose a king. That king might be an authority figure in this world. It might be a person that you look at and you say, I can't see Jesus, I can't see God, but I can trust in whoever this guy is. And we make that guy or that person our king. And we worship that thing, that idea. For some people, it's politics. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's a guy I was talking to yesterday. He was complaining his parents were capitalists. And he says, all they do is they worship capitalism. And I was like, you're fun. I want to hang out with this guy more. But that's it though, right? Do you know people that are like, I won't trust in anything, but I sure do trust in the stock market. Right? Or something, I don't really trust anybody, but I'm going to keep voting this way because they're the only ones that are going to get it right. I don't really trust anybody, but I trust my own opinions. I know that I'm the one who does my own research, and I know what I'm talking about. Everybody's going to choose a king. I just wonder what the world would look like if those of us who said that our king is Jesus actually lived like our king was Jesus. What new life would we find? Here's what I know we will do. We would no longer serve thrones that are built on greed. We would no longer serve thrones that are built on selfishness. We would no longer worship at thrones that are built on fear. We would worship a king who would lead us into generosity. We would worship a king who would lead us to compassion. And we would lead us to a king that would lead us to mercy. And guys, if you look at your life and you see that there are places where you're worshiping greed or people who push greed, if you're worshiping selfishness or people who think that selfishness is the answer, if you are worshiping at a place that is all about fear or people who build everything they believe on fear, then I'm going to tell you that you are in a very perilous position with your hands sitting against posts ready to take them down. And instead, what we're supposed to do is put our hands down, walk out of that place, serve the only true king who will lead us into grace and compassion and mercy into a kingdom that will change this world. That is what we're supposed to learn from the story of Samson. God, we are so thankful for stories like this that make us back up, recognize some new things about our own lives, things that maybe we're not seeing as clearly. God, help us in these stories to see the tragic story of Samson, but not just the tragic story of Samson. God, I ask you to help me today to see the tragic story of Ryan. That if I don't worship, if I don't choose the Jesus that I say that I believe in, that the story becomes a tragedy, not a story of rescue, a story of salvation, and a story of new life. God, help all of us today to put our names in that blank, the tragic story of mommy, the tragic story of daddy, the tragic story of all of us. Because God, that is who we are. That's who these kids are looking at. They need to see that we worship the true King. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.